Welcome to Sidetrack, your sci-fi TV and movie channel, and we are joined by look at you,
Michael Ball.
Michael Ball. Hey, Michael Ball from his Solo One podcast is joining to talk about the Orville. We do have quite an interesting rumor that I've heard in the last few days that we'll talk about at the end of the video if you can be bothered to hang around that long. But for now, we're gonna talk about our likes and loves and hates from the show and season 4, obviously. So first of all, Michael, when did you first come across the Orville?
Okay, so as a person who studies a lot of current science fiction series, I tend to look at a lot of news sites, and something came along about, was it 2017? It was near the same time as Discovery coming along, as a show where they wanted to sort of have something in the same vein as Star Trek, but in a more of a comedy thing. And I was thinking that it was going to be, what's that show, the other sci-fi movie where it's a comedy series?
Galaxy Quest.
Galaxy Quest, that's it.
Yeah, it's very much like Galaxy Quest.
And I thought, well, look, let's give it a go. And I thought, yeah, let's go along with it. And I obviously saw the first episodes and I was very interested. So let me turn the question back to you. What did you think about it when you first heard about it?
I've always loved Seth MacFarland. I just think he's a genius. So yeah, I thought it was very much Family Guy in space initially. I adored the first season. The first couple of episodes in particular, getting the new ship, calling it the Orville, and I thought, well, he's making a stupid joke, and then realizing why he'd called it that after obviously the Wright brothers and everything else. I'm thinking, oh, that's bloody clever. And I'd known he'd wanted to make a sci-fi show for years. He's a massive geek. He wanted to make a Star Trek show, and they wouldn't let him. So he went, I'll make my own then. And I just think, for a long time, the most Star Trek show on television was the Orville.
And obviously, we'll talk about how it changed. But especially the first few episodes, it was more of a general comedy show. It was more like Red Dwarf, as you've already said. It was more. It changed though. This is what's very interesting about the show. It did change.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that?
I miss the humor because I think Seth MacFarlane's humor, like I say, it did set it apart. Galaxy Quest to me was lighthearted, and yes, it was a comedy. It was a parody of Star Trek.
Yes, it was.
But the Orville was more of a comedy. It was actually funnier. I think we're getting a TV series of Galaxy Quest. I've heard that.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't get it. I think we've got a TV series of Galaxy Quest. It's called the Orville. Just renew that.
Yes.
We'll talk about season 4 in a bit, obviously. But, a lot of people said actually that the first season of the Orville failed. They said it didn't get very good ratings, which it maybe didn't. And because obviously at that point it wasn't on Disney Plus, it wasn't a streaming service, it was on was it on Fox? It was on Fox over here.
Fox, yeah, it's Fox, yeah.
Or wherever it was in the United States. And it didn't do great. But they put it on Disney and the ratings just went through the roof because it's one of those shows that is golden for streaming services. And I keep talking about this on the channel. Streaming services love a show that people watch, but what they really want is a show that people watch over and over and over again.
Yes.
That's why you don't get shows very often like Love Island or something like that on a streaming service. Something that, even though loads of people might watch it once, they're like, but they don't watch it again. So they love. That's why streaming services love sci-fi and they love crime dramas and things like this because people will watch it over and over and over.
Sure. Yeah.
And they did that with the Orville. So the first season was considered a failure, but really, as soon as it was just on the wrong thing.
Yes.
I think we started to see the humor disappear a little bit in season 2. Did you feel a tone difference?
I personally felt that the actual humor started to actually dissipate a bit in the first season, the latter half of the first season. And the second season, from the way I remember it, was that it was a very clever transition This is what is so strange about the show, but in some ways, season 2 was very. It was about 20% comedy, 80% drama, and the first season felt more like it was about 60% comedy, 40% drama. It was a very clever transition, but the way they did it actually kind of worked, because I kind of liked the humorous side of the first season, earlier episodes, but I kind of liked it more when it became a show with its own universe, great special effects, great characters, in a way that I thought, well, look, okay, it's Star Trek, it's not Star Trek, but it's a similar vein. It's got more comedy, but not too much comedy. I love comedy myself, but I like the fact that, to me, season 2 balanced out the comedy and the drama just right.
Well, let me ask you this then. In season 3, in New Horizons, do you feel that it maybe went too far the other way into the series?
That's a good question. Potentially, maybe, yes. It may be that it went to a point where it kind of alienated its own original premise of how it was when it started. I guess it's down to individual preference of humor.
Yeah, because there were still jokes. There was still
jokes, and the characters. So I don't mind it. So let me ask you. Obviously, you asked me. What did you think about the third season?
I think it did lose too much of the humor for me. It went too serious. I think about like the episode with Malloy when he found the phone. He basically
I love that episode.
The virtual episode thing. That was quite a serious. And Malloy was always sort of one of the main focuses of the comedy. So I know we saw his character develop and stuff, but that episode for me was borderline boring. I didn't particularly love it. But the series as a whole was about the KLine Attack. So
the KLines were very, very seriously menacing in the third season when they actually went all out, and it was such a clever thing with Isaac and his race. Well, obviously, it was his race, and how before we'd seen them in that episode, they were talked about, but they weren't properly featured. I think that's correct. But when we finally saw them, they were pretty bad. They were pretty kind of like their version of the Borg in some ways. I thought for some reason, I don't know why I think of the Borg, but they were a mechanical menace.
Yeah, I was sort of, if you had a species of Datas and they were that logical, because they weren't evil either, they were logical. Yeah. You are a risk, you are a threat to us, so we'll wipe that threat out. It's logical. We got a load of woke nonsense, people shouting woke in the third season, but I'm just like, just does my head in. I forget the female character's name, but the pilot who was supposed to be the 3D thing, and she ended up saving the day in the end. Very pretty pilot. And everyone's sort of going, "Oh, she's just brilliant at everything. She's a Mary Sue, whatever they bloody call it."
Well, I suppose I should ask you. I mean, obviously, a lot of the current shows, they do have what you call wokeisms. As an individual, are you bothered about it? It's a tough one, because we are in a world now where you have to have representation of stuff, but
sometimes they go too far.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to ask you. Yeah,
if the storyline comes first, it doesn't bother me. I mean, writers have always tried to tell a moral story or something like that in what they work. They try to put what they believe in their work. So if somebody is homosexual and they're writing and they've got things about the troubles of their community, that's going to appear in their writing. The problem with that character, again, whose name I've forgotten, I'll put it in the edit, was like nobody batted an eyelid when John Lamar all of a sudden became a genius. But she was a very clever girl, and people went crazy and started shouting woke. I felt that was unfair. Some people that shout woke, they'll put comments on my channel. I'm sure they do yours as well occasionally. And they basically say, everything's woke, everything. And I'm like, have you watched The Boys? have you watched? You know, you could list a million shows off the top of your head.
Yeah,
It's like,
so many examples, obviously. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
it's not easily. But I mean,
know,
obviously, it's not just about the workers. I mean, obviously, the fact of the matter is that this series is very clever because I remember watching it at the same time. Season 1 was on of that. Season 1 of Discovery. Now, I with Discovery, it's such a strange show because now I'm watching it from the perspective of what they've done since. Obviously, I love Picard. I love Strange New World. I like Strange New World. I love Strange. It's really good. I'm not into the animated stuff, but it's pretty good. I remember watching Discovery and remembering how much more I thought. Well, look, Strange New World season 1, that's Star Trek. Discovery isn't. It just feels like it's like another universe. It doesn't feel. It's got the name of Star Trek, but
the first
it
2
wasn't.
seasons in particular,
exactly.
Mostly the first season. Really, the second season wasn't as bad, but the first season,
exactly,
there was far too much influence from the Kelvin timeline and trying to blend the two.
Which because people involved with that were from working. Exactly.
Well, Kurtzman had come from.
I was going to say that Kurtzman was the one who. Yeah, exactly. You obviously know what I'm saying. So. When I watched the Orville, the early episodes, I was really thinking, this is what I want to see. This is what I wanted to see with Discovery. You know, why was it that, and not that perhaps not as like the comedy level, but the actual fact that it was kind of like it was in space. It was standalone. A lot of the episodes were quite standalone as well. I mean, what about
it was actually
arcs?
a positive attitude of the future, though, wasn't it? Whereas Discovery was very dark and very negative.
Yes.
But Orville was a positive look at the future, where humanity was actually trying to be its best. It was properly Gene Roddenberry Star Trek.
Yes, the Orville has incorporates a lot of Gene Roddenberry stuff in the actual show. I mean, like it's more of a comedy, but it has that kind of how do I describe it? That kind of embracing Discovery and away in. But more of a comedic side of things, at least in the early seasons.
With the humour coming away from the series, which is like I say, there's not as much humour in the last season. Yeah. Has it just become too much like Star Trek to actually have a 4th season, 5th season, 6th season? Is there, without the humour, is there any real point? Because we've got 5 seasons of Star Trek on Paramount. Just watch that.
In some ways, yes. I think, to be honest with you, deep down, it does feel more like a Star Trek copy, I think. But
more than like Babylon 5 or other sci-fi. Because, I mean, lots of sci-fi shows are spaceship, you know.
But it's very similar. It's a very similar premise, isn't it? It's very similar about you're on a ship, you're exploring, you encounter some bad races. They actually create alliances against you. Then you will fight them, but then another baddie becomes your goodie to fight them. But very DS9, you know, Dominion, Kardashian kind of feel. But now it's the KLine, it's the, you know, but I don't know. It's a very tough question because. Well, I don't know. Let me get your perspective, then I'll answer back from your perspective. What do you think?
I would actually say there are certain episodes of the Orville that if you pulled out those actors and put in the Next Generation actors and just did it exactly the same with exactly the same script, it would be a Star Trek episode.
Yes.
It's not just similar; they're very, very similar. I'm thinking about ones where they found that race that was in that bio ship. And it was, you know, like a ship that had been traveling through, but it was breaking. It was actually heading towards a star, I think. And there was this whole community living there that didn't know they were aboard a ship. I'm like,
that's right. Yes.
So a Star Trek: The Next Generation,
like a Prime Directive kind of thing or something.
Yeah, I mean, all over. So I do think, I think Seth MacFarlane's quite aware of that, and I do think he's tried to bring it away. But I think trying to create a show that he loves, he has just made a Star Trek copy.
I don't mind. To me, it's almost like it's like another spin-off of Star Trek, but with a slightly different kind of. It's like a Way Out spin-off. I mean, would it have been more unique if it had been more of the comedic side of things in season 1? I don't know.
I think I'd have liked to have seen that come through, but the problem was, and I think some of the complaints were, that it was just Family Guy in space. Now, I personally love that, and I love the drama elements. I always argue as well that when you've got a drama that doesn't have humour, and they go, "Oh, it's gritty and realistic," and I'm like, "Well, it's not." I've worked in several environments that are very stressful, and the first thing that the people I work with do when things are stressful is they make very inappropriate jokes, and they bring humor into it, because it's a coping mechanism. So I think whenever you see a drama without humor, it's like, that's not real life. People, maybe that's a British thing, that we take the piss out of everything when things are bad. The worse things get, the more, the darker the humor gets. But we laugh. I've worked for the NHS. I've worked for lots of things where it's a very, very stressful environment. Things like the joke where they're trying to teach Isaac practical jokes. So he does that practical joke, and he does Miss Potato Head and puts a thing on his head. They're all laughing at him.
I love that. That was really good.
So Isaac lobs his leg off, and he says, "Ha ha ha!" That was such a clever joke, because again, it told us something about Isaac as well. Yeah. I'd like to have seen more of that, because that, to be fair, was genius. Things with the Mocklins and the smoking and stuff like that. Again, it was just clever. But I think we have seen that throughout the 3 seasons. I just think Seth MacFarlane's trying to be more dramatic.
There is a question I have to ask you that I think that most people would actually, if they've seen much sci-fi as I've seen, that every show, whether it be Star Trek, Stargate, the Orville, there always are some stories where there's almost like a repetition. There is always stories where each franchise has something which is similar. Science fiction is strange because it's a big field of storylines and ideas and philosophies, but it is limited. There are only certain ways to go, and how many stories can you tell in science fiction?
Well, I mean, they reckon there's only, is it like 6 stories, really, if you boil them down? They're very basic.
That's what I was wondering. Exactly.
When you get down to the absolute basics, there's like revenge, love, adventure. I can't forget what the 6 are. But
not
and then everything else.
Everything
else is just a variation of those themes.
That's what I was wondering.
But I think when you've got something like The Next Generation that had 22 episodes and 7 seasons, and then you got Deep Space Nine, the same, whether you've got hundreds and hundreds of episodes, like Stargate had over 220 episodes.
It did. Had a lot.
There's only so many stories you can tell. And you're going to get, but we've seen this before. We've seen how Stargate Universe was inspired by was inspired by Battlestar Galactica. We've seen how Deep Space Nine was possibly slightly inspired by Babylon 5. Creative people will see something and they'll be inspired by it. They'll love something. They'll think, let's do our version of that, and that's just human nature. Which is why we do see things that you think, I swear I've seen this show before with other actors occasionally. But the nice thing about sci-fi is, though, that they can tell the same story in a million different ways. And you don't necessarily know you're seeing the same story. And they can do mysteries, they can do romantic episodes, and they can basically do an episode of every other TV show combined. That's one of the reasons why we love sci-fi so much, because they can do an action episode, they can do a rom-com, they can do anything. Whereas other things, Emmerdale is, that's American friends aren't going to know Emmerdale, but a situation comedy, say, you're very, very locked into that situation, whereas a sci-fi is any situation. First of all, there's loads of rumors. I actually dropped a rumor, 6 or 7 months ago now, that they were, Disney were talking to Seth MacFarlane and a couple of the other actors about bringing it back for season 4. But actually, there was a big stumbling block, or 2. Seth MacFarlane is insanely busy, particularly with the TED TV series. He's doing a movie, he's doing a few other things. And the budget. The budget for New Horizons was set too high. It's a very popular show, but it's not popular enough for the budget they gave it. So But apparently Seth MacFarland and others were very keen. They said, look, no, we can dial the budget back. We did it loads lower for the first season. We can bring it back towards something like that. I pretty much dropped that rumor first. It spread everywhere. Even JP actually repeated it on over at Egotastic Fun Time. So that we know now is true, because actors like Adriana Palicki, who played Kelly Grayson, has actually talked about how there's been conversations. There has been negotiations. So we know it's been talked about. Probably on pause at the moment, thanks to the writer's strike, as like with everything else. What do you think about what do you really think the chances are of the Orville coming back for season 4?
To answer your question, I think that from what I've seen of the series, it has certainly got a big fan base already, even though it's only been I think that COVID has been a major aspect, which has been a problem for the series, because it was going in its big strides, and then, of course, it was literally threw it a major spanner in its work. I would hope that it's a series itself that's unique enough, even though it's affiliated with Star Trek in some ways and other shows, that it's got the chance of a season 4. It's got a great cast. It's unique enough that I think it would work to stand and actually make another series. I don't know, in respect of, you've already mentioned the writer's strike, which is coming along, which has already started. And we're already hearing about Strange New Worlds might be delayed season 3, some of the Star Wars shows. I'm worried.
At the moment, it's story. This show's cancelled. This show's cancelled. This show's cancelled.
Yeah.
Some of the writer's strike.
So I'm worried that if COVID was the first kind of like dagger in the heart of the show, then maybe the writer's strike potentially could be the final and last dagger of a potential new season. That's what my fear is, even though I'm no expert.
I have heard rumours that there are people that work closely that make these decisions at Hulu and at Disney Plus, because they do work together closely, that wouldn't mind Seth MacFarlane focusing on other things like Ted, that they expect to be a much bigger hit than the Orville. Even though the Orville is fine, it does just good numbers for them. They would rather he focused on other things. There is maybe a plan that they can use the writer's strike as an excuse to kill the Orville.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, actually. Potentially.
I have heard that rumor a couple of times.
What do you think?
Right, so I do think that the budget is an issue. I can tell you that I have heard a very strong rumor recently that actually the show is going to return for season 4.
Okay.
But that in the first or second episode, Seth MacFarlane's going to leave the series.
Oh, that's always the kiss of death, though, when that happens.
Yeah, generally speaking. So Kelly Grayson would become the captain.
Nothing wrong with her. I like Kelly. She's all right.
Yeah, she kind of alluded to this in an interview a little bit, and one of the people I speak to have said, yeah, that looks like that's going to be the current plan. The biggest problem is Seth MacFarlane is just too busy.
Yeah,
he can't do everything.
Too many hours in the fire.
Yeah, he's got a couple of big movies coming up. He's got, like I say, the Ted TV series coming up. He's still obviously doing Family Guy and American Dad. He's still involved with. I believe American Dad's still going. I have a funny feeling I mentioned it, but anyway, I never really watched it. But he's got a lot on the go, so he basically has time to write. Apparently, he's a workaholic and he just writes till like 4 a.m. every night, and he has a team of people that he actually writes with and works with. Actually, starring in the series takes up too much time.
Right.
And being an executive producer. So if we get the Orville back for season 4, it might be without Seth MacFarlane.
So how do you feel about it if that happened? Would you be all right with that?
I think about this in 2 ways. On one hand, Seth MacFarlane isn't the greatest actor that's ever lived. I love him, and he's great in the series.
I know, but he filmed it. That's the problem. He was the one that was. I know you're right, but I suppose it's like when Richard Dean Anderson left, like Stargate. It was kind of like it was a different kind of vibe when he left in season 8.
Yeah.
Season 8.
For me, it didn't weaken. when Richard Dean Anderson left those Stargate, because they brought in
some good new characters. Yeah, okay, yeah, okay.
It was different, but it wasn't worse.
It was still good. Yeah, I agree. I agree about that. Yeah.
They would have to bring in other actors, which I think is. I mean, when Alara left, they brought in Tala Kayali as a replacement.
Yeah.
And I thought that worked.
Yeah, it did work.
They're all of the actors that are in the series are now out of contract. So if we do come back,
I've heard that. Yeah.
We're going to have to get them all recontracted. So we could see a different cast anyway. So I could see that people might come back for just one episode, and then something maybe catastrophic happens, and we see a different show.
If Picard left Star Trek Next Generation, that would have been a huge thing. If Seth MacFarland's character left the Orville, I should say, it probably could survive better.
And I think they could maybe don't kill him, maybe promote him. Maybe he's an admiral. And
same as O'Neill was like a general in seasons 9 and 10 and stuff like that.
Drop in and out when he can.
Yeah, I can see that.
I can see that. So he doesn't have to film for like 4 months. He could just come in for a couple of days here and there and whatever.
And he could probably do that. And that would still be kind of like he could like do his like one-liners and sort of stuff like that, and it would still kind of work potentially. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
So that is the rumor, but obviously, as with everything at the moment, even Stargate, which we believe is sewn on to be announced at San Diego Comic-Con, we believe. Okay.
When's that?
Middle of June.
Okay.
So, but with the writer's strike, somebody asked me how many chevrons are locked for Stargate, and a couple of weeks ago I said 7 chevrons are locked. It's happening. I was 100% convinced.
Has it gone back to 6 now because of the writer's strike?
I've gone back to 6 now. 6 chevrons are locked now.
I knew you could say that.
Just because the writer's strike now puts an element of unknown in. I think, though, the writer's strike is going to be used by production companies, by streaming services, etc., as a correction. They're going to get rid of a lot of shows, and it's already happening. Like I say, go on Deadline, show cancel.
Yeah,
something about Disney being in financial trouble, and then another show's been cancelled. You know what I mean? It's they're correcting it. I think there's an element of quantity over quality in the last couple of years in the fight to get just stuff onto the streaming services, just material. They just wanted content, and I think the writers' strike will be used as a correction. They need to be producing less stuff. They've been spending way too much money. They need to spend less, and they need to simply make less stuff. And this is why it's going to be a nervous time for things like Stargate. But I actually think Stargate will happen anyway. I think they'll cancel a bunch of stuff and then they'll announce new things as a fresh dawn sort of thing. And I think Stargate will be one of those things.
As someone who's been doing sci-fi podcasting with my colleague on my show for nearly 4 years, the one thing we've been saying the whole time, I know we're slightly off topic here, is when is Stargate going to come back? And I've watched your show, and I think you've been really informative. And I think that obviously now it looks like it's going to actually probably happen. But my worry is with the writer's strike, is it going to be the catalyst? Going back to the Orville, I think the Orville season 4, which is why we're actually here today, I'm worried about that because of the writer's strike, and I hope that I'm wrong.
I like you said, I like that analogy. You said that COVID was the first knife in the belly of the COVID, but it survived it. Can it survive a second?
That's what I'm thinking about personally.
And I think it can, but like I say, the conversation might not include Seth MacFarland.
Well, I have to hope. Fingers crossed.
We'll see what happens. Right. Get into the comments, everybody. Tell us what you think about that. Do you want the Orville to return? If it does return, would it be okay if Seth MacFarland wasn't involved and we did have Captain Grayson? I'd love to know your thoughts. Get into the comments. Thank you so much, buddy. Michael Ball from the Solar
very much.
Podcast. I will drop a link to your channel in the description, guys. Go and have a look. He does live videos every week. I appear in them occasionally. And just loads and loads of brilliant episodes all the time. So go and check him out. Just as we mentioned Stargate, there will also be a link to the Stargate petition in the description. We are asking for Brad Wright to return in the new Stargate franchise. We have a small window of opportunity here before this show gets announced. There are people at MGM that want Brad Wright to be involved. So let's give him a little bit of a nudge. Follow the link. We've got about 2,000 people signed up already. It's only been on there about 36 hours or something. So let's see if we can push that past 10,000. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you very much.
We will see you again, sir.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Excellent. It might be my internet, but all the way through, Michael has had a slight delay.
I don't know what it is. I can see that my end. I don't know why that is. I apologize. It's my end, I guess.
So apologies if that's irritated anybody, but you've got me, so it's fine. Anyway, thank you so much, sir. See you next time.
See you next time.